What is happening, everybody? MG here, MGCovers, bringing you a brand new sports handicapping video. Title of this video, How to Build a Plug-and-Play Sports Betting Model. We're going to use NCAA basketball as an example. Super educational video, applicable to other sports as well. Before we do that, as always, please subscribe to the channel if you're a regular watcher and haven't. If you're watching this video for the first time, love to have you as a subscriber. You will learn the unadulterated truth about sports betting simply by subscribing and watching a lot of videos. So you can expedite the learning process, something that I didn't have when I started in this business. And you can get really good, really quick at this business with zero investment simply by subscribing to the channel. If you follow me on Instagram, Twitter, it's MGCovers. We'll talk about an interesting little Twitter battle yesterday. Later in the video, it's MGCovers, cover spelled with the Z. If you want to click the link in the description box, that will take you right there. And I give out a lot of content on Instagram as well, things I might not normally make a video about. So again, if you follow me on Instagram, ton of value for learning this business. Okay, a plug and play sports betting model. Let me define what that is first. A plug and play sports betting model takes all of the subjectivity out of it. The reason that's important is that it makes it easy to handicap because there's no subjectivity in it. And what I mean by subjectivity is you have two parts to handicapping: the objective side, which is the stat model, and you have the subjective side. What is the subjective side? Things like scheduling, things like fatigue, things like injuries, things like home and away advantage, etc. So with a plug and play model, you're eliminating all that. And I'll talk about how we're going to do that. So let's talk about the first part, which is the objective part. Now, you have to have a really good stat model. And a stat model is a sports betting model that uses recent stats to calculate a line so that you compare that to the books line. Now, I may link a video on how to do that, but I'll describe it here briefly. You want one simple way to do it: look at recent box scores and try to find a stat or stat that correlates to winning, meaning look at the team that won. What are the stat or stats that winning team does better or did better in that game than the losing team? And a lot of times you can, very simple way to do it. And then, of course, it gets more complicated because you have to take those stats, create a power ranking, and create a line. But that's the premise of how it's done. And then once you have a model, which we're looking at now, this is my NCAA basketball model from 12/20. You have to create what we call a criteria, meaning like what would designate a potential play. Now, in the past, one potential way to do it, let's take a look at this. For example, Western Illinois, it's minus 18. If we go and look and say the books line is, say, minus 10, we might say a potential play would be if we have at least a 5-point differential, meaning a 5-point difference between my line and the sportsbook line if we have value. So if the sports betting line was minus 10 in this game, our line is minus 18, we have what we call an 8-point differential. And if our criteria is a 5-point differential, then that would qualify as a potential play. All right, now what we've done with NCAA basketball, I was fortunate last year I had a client discover that, and this is different. What he discovered was if a team is minus 5 my line at home, they win at an extremely high ratio. Now, he's also using statistical properties, which is another excellent tip for building a plug and play model. And what I mean by a statistical property is stat or stats that are facts about that sport. For example, in college basketball, home teams win 70% of the time. And as you know, if a team wins, the majority of time they also cover in conjunction with a really good model. So by avoiding playing away teams, you already know that if you just play home teams, there's a 70% chance that that team is going to win, thus making your model, quote, very sharp. Whereas if you were to mix and match playing away teams, playing home teams, that would skew that percentage. So what he discovered was playing teams minus 5 my line, irregardless if there was value or not, And if they were home, they won at an extremely high percentage. So when you're creating a plug and play model, you have to have a criteria. Okay. And it's difficult to do. Okay. I'm not going to lie. And again, you may have a good model and not know it. For example, with baseball, the start of the year, we went about $3,500 in the hole, made some adjustments in how I approached the model. It was the same model. I did not change the model. I changed my approach to the model. And then we ended up 13 units from that point and made about 10 grand from that model after it was in the hole 3,500. So a lot of times your model may be good. It's the way you're interpreting the model. So I really like this method and we've had a lot of success, and I'm going to show you year-to-date stats here. So in essence, what he did was any team. So part one is the criteria. We're looking for teams that are minus at least -5 my line. So when we scroll through this, let's go ahead and do this. So you see East Carolina is -3. So that would be, we would add that one. NC State -5. That would be another one under consideration. Dayton -9. And again, just looking at home teams, Georgia -5. Oh, and one other criteria I'll bring this up about. Okay, that one didn't work. Oh, and another thing I did with NCAA basketball, let me mention this. I'm only going to play teams where the sportsbook line is -15 or less, because the average margin of victory in NCAA basketball is 11 points. So the bigger the number, statistically speaking, the more difficult it will be for those teams to cover. And it just makes the process even simpler. Okay. So we continue. So Georgia would be one. St. John's would be another one. Now, again, you can see here Connecticut's -7. We wouldn't look at that because they are the away team, and I'm not going to consider teams that are on a neutral court. East Tennessee -5. Keep scrolling. Rice -10.7. Oklahoma -5. That would not be considered because that was a neutral site game, right? And then Creighton -18. New Mexico -5. UC Santa Barbara -5. Cal State Fulton -12. Arizona -7. But again, that was a neutral court game, so we wouldn't consider that. Okay. So there was one I missed in there. So looking at the next sheet, so these are basically all the teams via the model that are -5 or greater and at home and not on a neutral court, meaning they're true home teams. Okay. Now, this is the next part. So you might be asking yourself, well, how can you handicap a game when you're not going to consider those subjective factors like injuries, um, home and away, fatigue, maybe a coaching change, maybe one of their best players is sitting out for whatever reason? We're going to use line movement, but in a different way than I had explained previously. So now we will go to the actual box score and lines. Now, what I first want to do, as you know, I'm a huge proponent and advocate of looking at late line movement and what sharp line movement. For example, let's say a line is -5 and we're considering the -5 team, and say 15 minutes before tip off, that line moves to 5.5. That would be an example of majority of time sharp movement, meaning the line went from 5 to 5.5. Sharps probably played it at 5. The line bumps to 5.5. So it's an indication this is what the sharps are doing, because they're making that line more attractive for the opposite side. So that's what I call traditionally how I play. However, I'm going to show you a way that we've incorporated with NCAA basketball, and you could potentially use this for other sports. I haven't tested it for other sports, but it could potentially work. So there's two situations where sharps play. You have sharps that play early, meaning they already have their model, and when the lines are released, that's when they play. They're trying to find discrepancies, and you often hear sharps say the best time to play is early. There is some truth to that. Um, That's not how I've played traditionally in my career, and my mentor, Bob McCune, was an advocate of playing late as well. However, I do want to read you a Bob McCune quote. If you don't know who he is, you can Google his name. He was a sharp back in the late 70s, 80s, 90s, wrote several great books. It's how I got started. And I'm going to read this quote. It says, late action has to be understood in a different light than early action. And what he means by that is, for example, the reason why late line movement can be difficult. I use that example. Sometimes you'll see a line. Let's do that. Use that same example. Let's say the line is -5, right? It moves to 4.5 and then back up to 5. But this was at 3 o'clock and stays at the 5 from 3 o'clock until tip off. You see what I'm saying? That becomes difficult. Was that last move sharp? And the fact the line didn't move, what do you do? So anyway, he goes on to say, early action represents the results of smart handicapping. So again, you have really two schools of thought here. So in this particular model, instead of handicapping injuries, um, maybe fatigue for a team, line movement is going to help us incorporate that to make this a true plug and play model. Because generally speaking, if you have a best player of a team is not going to play, will that be reflected in the line movement? Yes, if it's relevant to um, what could potentially happen in that game. So by using a really good model, using line movement, we pretty much cover almost 100% of the handicapping aspect. And doing it this way makes it real simple. You just saw, we just went through our entire model, looked at the teams that were -5. Now, let me show you the next step. All right, so we had Georgia listed as a, no, let's go back. Let's use St. John's. Let's start here. We'll look at St. John's. So you can see there on the screen, St. John's. And again, we don't look at ticket count. All we're doing is, this is real important, we're going to look at the opening line. Now, this is the site that I'm using. This is bookmakersreview.com. It's a great resource. Now, let me explain their opening line. They use what I call a consensus opening line, which means they take opening line of all the sports books and basically come up with an average, quote, opening line. The reason that's important is that you wouldn't want to use a sharp book for an opening line the way that I'm handicapping, because, for example, let's say the consensus opening line, well, let's use the St. John's example here. So St. John's, the line opens at 4.5, and you can see here it moved to 5.5, right? So it opened at 4.5 and closed at 5.5, and I'm using Bookmaker there. If you look at a sharp book, the sharp book could have potentially opened that. Maybe they opened it at 5.5. You see what I'm saying? So you wouldn't be able to see the movement at all. That line would be the same. So the reason using a consensus line like this, you're able to easily identify the movement, if that makes sense. So this is our second step in the handicapping process, and it's very simple. We look at the opening line, and if the line closes higher than the opening line, then it would be a play. So in this example, St. John's, if we go back to the model real quick, let me scroll back up here. I just want to make this simple so that there's no, so everybody can understand this and see it. So you see there's St. John's is -6, then the line is -4, so there's not much value. But again, with this particular way that we're handicapping this plug and play model, it only has to be -5 or greater. So it's -6. So the step 2 would be, okay, this line is -4.5. We check this line again using Bookmaker's closing line, maybe 10 to 15 minutes before the game kicks off, or you can wait even later. It's at 5.5. So it increased the whole point. So that would be a play, and St. John's won and covered. And it's just that simple. Now, what I also do is if the line remains the same, it is a no play for me. So we have to have positive line movement in order for it to be a play. So let's continue on and look at another example. And let's go to that Georgia game now. Georgia, 12.5. And look what happens. So it opens at 12, bookmaker, it closes at, opens at 12 and a half, closes at 12. So the line moves against Georgia. And look what happens. It was a push. Okay. Let's look at the next one. Oakland and Dayton, line opens at 11. Scroll over here to bookmaker, 11 and a half. So that would be a play. Dayton won and covered. Okay, so let's take a look. Here's another good one. NC State. We had NC State minus 12. Line remains at 12. And check that out. That was a push as well. All right, let's look at another one. East Tennessee State minus. Well, I lost my place here. East Tennessee State minus 4.5. Look where it closes. It closes at 5. That's basically our trigger. So that would be a play, and they won. And let's go down. Let me show you an example. Okay, look at Creighton. Creighton was minus 7. It moves to 9, and they did not cover. So we lost that one via the model. Let's see. I was trying to show an example where, give me 1 second. I'm going to go back and look at. All right, let's take a look at Southeast Louisiana. Scroll back up here, because I was wanting to show an example where it actually saved us money. Yeah, this is it. Perfect example. Okay, so Grambling State, Southeast Louisiana. We had South Louisiana as a potential play. It opens at 7. Now it goes down to 6, so it moved against them, and look what happens. They won, but did not cover. So that line movement actually saved us. So line movement, whether you're using the closing line or handicapping it this way, it's a very, very simple process. But again, who knows? Maybe Southeast Louisiana had, you don't know the circumstances of what happened, and we don't need to read a game preview because the line itself is, the line movement is doing all that for us, right? So we have a really good model. We're using opening line, comparing that to the closing line, and using that as our trigger point. Now, oh, and you will have situations. Let me show you this down here. And making sure you stay disciplined. For example, if you look here, Cal State Fulton was minus 12.5. You go over here, line stayed at 12.5. So technically that would be a no play, even though, no, that would have been a loss. Okay. That's a really good example there. UC Santa Barbara, that was a play, minus 9. It stayed at 9. That would have been a no play, and it was a, even though they won. So let's take a look. Whoops. All right, let's take a look at the results here. All right, now, so you see the potential, this was via the model. East Carolina, Dayton, St. John's, East Tennessee State, Rice, New Mexico, Creighton, all had positive line movement. Creighton was the only loss. Now, I do want to cover something I mentioned earlier about Twitter. We sent it out as a, sort of like a free play. It was a lean. Virginia via the model was minus, I think, 13 via my line. This is when they were playing. I just forgot who they were playing. Maybe Memphis. Yeah, Virginia was playing Memphis. We did actually play that, even though that didn't qualify as a potential play via the model, and it was a loss. Just for clarification, if you want to jump on my Twitter account, I got attacked because we sent out basically a lean, and it lost. And people, again, a lot of people are uneducated about the business. And again, loss, you have to normalize losing in this business. The only way to be considered a sharp in this business is to be able to win long term. For example, even when you look at this model, this is the model handicapping this way year to date. 26 and 15, up 9.75 units. That is very, very good. That's 63%. It probably will have some regression. Will this be profitable for an entire season? We don't know, because it's the first time I've handicapped this way. But it's a very simple process and definitely looks promising. And again, that's the only way you can measure success. Even now, to say it's successful, we don't know. So we'll have to see what this model does in end of the year. And I believe it's going to be successful. I had a client had a ton of success in January, February. The reason I think the model will get even more sharp is because when teams play in conference, sharpens the model. Teams are very close as far as levels, and I think that will sharpen the model. So what I'll do now is just briefly review if you would like to build or have plans to build a plug and play model. Again, looking at the box scores, find stats that correlate to winning, and once you do that, you're going to have a criteria. It may be value, meaning you say, hey, I need to have at least a 5-point differential, a 3-point differential, or you could have some sort of qualifying number like I do with only playing home teams using statistical properties, which is another great tip that you can use to your advantage. Statistical properties, again, facts about that sport. Home team wins 70% of the time in college basketball. We just focus on home teams. Again, having that identifying criteria, and then using some form of line movement or something else to incorporate other things that you would normally handicap subjectively, and boom, you're covering pretty much everything that you can handicap. So again, super excited about this model. If you want access to these power rankings every single day and handicap this way, you can do that. It's $50 a month, great value. In addition to that, you get access to all my coaching videos. There's probably about 150 on the website. There's a link to join the description box if you want that. In addition to all my plays, $100 a month. And then the best value, and I've described this as getting an associate's degree in sports handicapping. If you pay every single month, it's $100 a month. If you get access to plays, or you can save about $600 joining for an entire year. $500 gives you access to everything on the site for 1 year. You will get really good at this business using that option. Greatly appreciate you watching this video. Good luck. Love to hear some success stories. You guys trying to build a plug and play model. Take care. Like this video. Subscribe. Talk to you guys soon. Peace.